Welcome, everybody, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Security Happy Hour. It is me, the Cyber Warrior. This is Cyber Warrior Studios, and we got an amazing show planned. I hope you're all excited. I hope you're all ready. Grab your drinks, whatever they are. Have your questions ready because we're about to talk AI and cybersecurity, and I'll be back in about 10 seconds. And we're back. So with me this evening, I have the one, the only, the amazing Ryan Rosado back again, and we are discussing AI and cybersecurity today. Ryan, how you been?
Good. How are you?
You know, I can't complain. It's Friday, which is always a good day. It gets me into the weekend, and hopefully work calms down this weekend.
I don't know if it's just me, but your audio seems super muted. And mine's is as I can get it.
Let me find out because my mic seems to be on a tizzy right now. Let's see. Oh, volume's all the way up.
Well, I can hear you now.
Okay.
When you were closer to it. All right, no worries. I'm sure we can figure it out.
We'll get there. It'll work. I promise. I'll move it closer.
I just don't know if anyone else can have a problem, but hopefully it's just me.
I'm sure they'll say something if they do. But yeah, so with everything going on, AI is the topic of conversation today. And I'm curious because I've seen a lot of posts and a lot of people talk about AI. Me and you have talked about it at length with vendors. What is your take on a lot of people talking about AI almost replacing a SOC? I've seen some conversations around that.
Derek, I can't hear you, so I'm going to try to put on headphones. Can you just give me a second?
Yep.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Sorry about that. Sorry. Yeah, so let's talk about AI. I have no idea what you said up until I put my headphones in, but super excited to talk about AI and cybersecurity, kind of where things might be going. I thought about it too, where I'd rather certain things go. Not sure that those are two in the same. I think that's fair. Yeah, and I also done some AI training recently, and then I've just kind of been feel like I've been following along for a while, but just try to do a crash course to kind of expand my horizons. Happy to share that today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AI is something I think is confusing for a lot of people because there's a lot of different terminologies that come out. And like I said earlier when you couldn't hear me, me and you talked about this a little bit, but there's AI, LLMs, machine learning, behavioral analytics. Like there's all these different terms that kind of fall under the umbrella of AI. But I don't think there's really a solid understanding of how that affects cybersecurity, especially when you're looking at things like a SOC. So in terms of like security operations, how would you see, AI influencing that?
So I think we need to back up. Let's talk about what you just asked throughout the next hour. So the first part with some of the terminology, I think it's important to realize that AI did not directly come out of cybersecurity, but just like I think everyone else, cybersecurity is trying to learn, just like the medical community is trying to learn how to incorporate AI, just like the defense, community, just like the manufacturing community, right? Like in a way, I think what's really interesting is to compare how over the last 2 decades, all these industries were just trying to comply, understand, comprehend cybersecurity. And us being in cyber, we didn't have to adapt to it because we were in it. We just had to stay up to date. But here's AI coming actually into cyber. And I think because it happens on a computer, people assume cyber and AI go together. But they're not directly related, right? So it's it's its own thing, which makes sense that in the terminology, artificial intelligence, terms then like machine learning, deep learning, generative AI, people are using interchangeably when they are in fact very, very different and all are under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. So I think that's the first piece to understand. because if you assume that AI is part of cyber or came from cyber, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. So I think that's like a very, like, just from a foundational standpoint, a very important place to start from.
So do we have an understanding where even AI started? Like, what was the first in our modern era, the
Oh my
first
God, I wish I could
iteration of
present. Can
AI?
I present? I don't. So,
I'm just confused because, like, if we look at it, if it didn't come from cyber, right, it had some technology aspect. So what would
so,
have been
so
that?
history lesson. And I don't know all of this, but I do know, I feel like, more than most. So let's start with the cyber piece. Like, and I think we talked about this one of the first times I was on the show, but how far back do you think cybersecurity goes? And I'll give you a hint. It wasn't always called cybersecurity, but it was actually called computer security, which essentially was cybersecurity. How far back do you think that goes?
Late 90s, early 2000s.
So you have to keep in mind that the first CISO officially was in 1995, but computer security, as well as, they weren't calling it exactly this, but essentially what we know as defense in depth was mentioned as early as the early 70s in DoD reports with DARPA as they created what we also know as like the internet.
Right, because the DARPA net came before the internet.
Right. So if you think about how, especially our history with computers and how like they used to have computers the size of like gymnasiums and school buildings and bedrooms, then you should know that, and some of the research I've started to do is that as they were creating these, computing systems, they actually started talking about artificial intelligence as, and when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's computers that mirror or can mimic human intelligence, not just like a fancy calculator, but can essentially reason, as early as the 1950s. So it actually predates cybersecurity. And the term artificial intelligence was officially coined in 1956.
That's crazy because when I think about artificial intelligence and AI now, it's been in science fiction forever, right? Like you have these robots and androids and things like that. That I mean, you just look at Star Trek and Mr. Data. They have all these things, but I I don't think, in my point of view, we saw anything close to AI, not behavioral analytics, not any of the other subsets of it that kind of fall into that spectrum until probably the early 2000s.
So the first chatbot from some of the research I did was, and it was, barely any intelligence, but the first chatbot was in the 1960s. But I would agree that most of what we know as AI started in the mid to late 90s. And I think what's important to remember is that when cybersecurity and AI and computer, just computer science, as these things were really happening in their early stages, they were not happening public. We also didn't have the internet for things like this to be, across the news. So like it was in newspapers that you had to read about, and most people didn't even see a computer. They didn't know what it looked like. They didn't know how to work it, right? I mean, yeah, we are the first generation that has had computers probably well ingrained into our, childhood. We're also the last generation that grew up totally without computers and had, at least the first, I don't know, I remember having computer class in kindergarten, and a few years after that having a computer at home, big boxy desktop. But we're the last generation that essentially didn't have computers in our home at some point in our childhood. So as a generation. So I think it's just important to remember that like AI is just, I feel like, really broken into society. It is, I think, a terminology, even if not well understood. Everybody is saying AI this, chat GPT that. Like it is become a global phenomenon very quickly. So but just because it just caught attention does not mean that it's like brand new created in the last 5 years. I think
Right.
in order to get to the point that we're at, there have had to be decades worth of research,
Yeah,
as
and
with anything else.
yeah, you're gonna have your iterations, your dev, and it's gonna take years to develop, especially something as sophisticated as a legitimate artificial intelligence that can reason without manual intervention, I would say. So I think we've come a long way, but it's just interesting to see like the history and know the history of it. And that's why I asked that question, because
Yeah.
the history of it is kind of intriguing to me.
So I think though, if you put on the cybersecurity perspective of AI, and I know you asked for SOC operations, but I think it's important to mention that like it can help in every facet of cybersecurity. Just like, I mean, it's probably some that initially it'll help better than others, but I mean, they're trending that we're going to have what they're calling super AI or true, like an AI that can really match human intelligence in reasoning by
Yeah.
2060. Some people think it'll come much sooner. That's a different conversation. But as far as like cybersecurity, so like your defensive cyber ops, right? So in a SOC, I think AI is already helping, lead threat hunting. It's automating. Personally, I think what was really trendy 5 to 7 years ago, we called SOAR, Security Operations Automation Response. I don't know why that term super died, but I think in a lot of ways that this is like the next level SOAR. So it can automate, detection and response. It can have, it really can reinforce and augment your cyber threat intelligence by, strengthening their defenses and analyzing data much quicker and faster. And even finding things that so like if I was threat hunting, I might say, look at a specific APT that I think could put my organization at risk and look for, certain behaviors or IOCs. Technically in a large language model, you could feed it logs, and let's say the profile of a few APTs, and it should be able to even identify like the queries it comes up with might be better that then show you an answer. So essentially humans are like limited to the questions we ask of our data and the ability to then look for it in the logs or however we're performing our forensics or threat hunting. And AI can potentially look at and understand a threat profile better and know better questions to ask and then go find the answer. And that's a basic way of explaining it.
So from the CTI perspective, and even looking at the level 1, level 2 of kind of SOC operations, I get it, because a lot of MDRs um, operate in that realm, right? They implement a lot of automation where if you see this, just go do this, right? Quarantine a file, do whatever, or isolate a computer. My fear with AI, and I think it's mainly because I don't think we're at that level of it yet some companies think we are, is to bake in the automation, you're baking in these isolation tasks where if you see something, isolate this domain controller, whatever it happens on, immediately isolate that device or do whatever's
That's a
necessary.
really simple thing. You have to realize with AI, it's doing two things. And so one of the things it's doing is essentially the human, like the way that when you compare it to human reasoning, it's that ability to, it's not just like entering a calculator where 2 + 2 = 4. It's basically you give it a bunch of numbers and it should figure out almost like what question it should be asking. It's like reverse, right?
Right.
Kind of like human intelligence. It should be thinking like a human, but the part that AI, when we talk about really what automation is in this realm is, let's just say I was studying for a degree. Let's say I wanted to become a doctor, and that would take about 12 years. Well, AI can essentially go through and learn how to potentially diagnose by looking at what could take me easily 100 years of human speed reading, even if I'm a really fast reader and a great fast learner. AI can take like 100 years and process it potentially in like a month, if not quicker. And that's so you want human level reasoning at like super, speed of light speeds. And I think if you think about it like that, asking it to do simple tasks is actually the easy part. It's when you ask it to potentially do harder things. But at the end of the day, we still have a big issue because AI is basically only as good as the data you give it. And the problem we have right now is that a lot of, depending on what you're asking it to do, a little bit outside the security realm, more, for example, like if you're asking AI to scan resumes and find the best candidate for a certain job description, Like there are just countless, like time after time, findings that because of the gender-based data the model was taught on in its training is it's going to almost always prefer men. Just like society, if a woman and a man put in a resume and they have the same skills and the resume is almost identical, if not actually identical, studies show that companies have chosen the male over the female for like either unbiased or excuse me, subconsciously or consciously biased reasons. And so if you have data like that, you're going to have your AI also repeat that in society, which is a huge detriment in, I think, different industries, but also, of course, could impact ours, especially in the realm of jobs and hiring. And it's already a male-dominated field. So if I'm applying to a job and your first, whether I realize it or not, the first level is my resume is getting scanned by an AI that's looking to see if I'm a good fit, I could potentially always be at I could always be at like, it's going to be harder and more challenging.
Well, and so I'm going to touch on that because I have a problem with ATS systems as it is. But also the original point, though, that I was trying to make is even though the basic logic of like, hey, if this, do this, is a very simple task for AI. The reason why I say you can't necessarily replace humans right now and why it'll take probably quite a few years for AI to catch up is that there are times you don't want, depending on the system or the business impact, you do not want a system to have something detrimental happen to it. You want to be able to be given the opportunity to do certain things and investigate certain things. Whereas right now, the way AI functions currently is if it sees something, it does something.
So
The
I
name
don't,
of the system
so
and things like that don't matter.
I'm not sure where you're seeing that. I don't think that that's as accurate. And also, it's important to distinguish AI, even if you're asking it to do something simple. AI, large language models, are not. It's not based on what you're asking necessarily. It's more so based on how much data. So if you're giving it like 100 different logs from the last year, or you're only giving it like 10 logs that are only from the last 90 days, regardless of what you're asking it to do, the way that large language models are going to, it doesn't matter. The point is it's more about the data set. And also what's important to know or like consider is that most data so a SIM processes structured data based on logs. These are structured,
Right.
They have columns, right? AI is also able to analyze a lot more unstructured data, images, videos. We know this when we think of deep fakes. So if you think of it from like a security perspective of identifying threats in an environment, it's also important to remember that in the way that our world is working, that the unstructured data is expected to be like 90% of the data that's being processed. So just that's one thing I would keep in mind when we talk about how simple AI prompts are. That said, I went to a conference last year, and I think that this is going to stick with me for a long time. And I know everybody's worried about AI replacing people, but this conference said humans with AI will replace humans without AI. And I think to the point you just showed, I think it's in most, if not all cases, reckless to have AI act completely independent and autonomously.
Right.
And I think, I don't know if you've heard or you remember, I think it's kind of caught a lot of the popular channels that like a lawyer, which apparently legal was one of the first industries to really adopt AI widespread like a year or two ago. But a lawyer asked, this LLM to study case law and to come up with relevant, case law to cite for a court case. And it actually made up data because the reasoning part of it was essentially did not necessarily understand. So it made up cases that didn't exist. And now the problem is this lawyer or his legal team, paralegals, they should have taken what the AI gave it and confirmed it. They didn't. They just said, cool, we're going to use this. We're going to win our case. This is great. Come to find out, it totally made them up. It is not real. And very embarrassing. So to that point, I don't think, we're real. I mean, if we're automating like an email going into like a, sandbox or a quarantine, I think that's simple. And that might not really necessarily be AI. That could be, just a control system that identifies a signature and then based on a potential signature match, just knows to like, okay, automatically. I mean, we still have computer science. So not everything is AI that has an
Yeah,
ability
and I
to,
think a lot of it is SOAR, right? It's that initial security operations and automated response type of deal, because that's still kind of a realm I live in right now, and I think that's what it's not necessarily AI.
right.
It's if you see this, do that, and so I have to reinforce to people you don't want an automated like quarantine, like disconnect this from everything response on business critical applications because it could be the most benign malware out there that legitimately just I don't know, maybe it's something stupid like a toolbar or something, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, it has malware, so isolate this.
Well,
Like
I think that
that is
just
the
talks
dumbest
about the
thing ever.
responsible way of setting up just the controls in your environment, AI or not. And I think that talks to where security professionals need to make sure at all levels, whether you're a junior analyst or a security manager, that you are taking that level of detail to ensure that, whatever actions don't impact the business. I
Mhm.
mean, I feel like that's a very basic principle. And in doing that, make sure that if you are automating anything, that it's in a controlled environment that again will have minimal impact to the operations. And because end of the day, we've talked about this in cybersecurity always, is that cybersecurity should not be a detriment to the business and it should not stop the business from running. And I think in the past, when cybersecurity becomes so inconvenient and that then it forces, people to have to work 3 times harder just to do whatever they need to do in their industry, then that's when cybersecurity gets a bad rep. And so that's where being a sophisticated uh, and experienced, I think, cybersecurity professional really comes in hand or comes in handy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why, like, to your point, the human with AI tools, and I think that's what companies need to understand and what people need to understand is AI should be a tool in your tool belt. It should be something you can
Right.
utilize. It should never be a hey, we got this whatever newfangled tool that has AI and can do all the things. Let's replace our security team or our IT team or whatever.
Right.
Like it should never be a replacement. It should be a
It's the
tool.
same as those people who started in cybersecurity in the 90s and were heavy, on like setting up networks on prem and how they, in order, to continue moving forward in our industry, needed to probably become aware about cloud environments. Another good example I always love to reflect on that's probably even more obvious is like, you know, telephones and email, more so email replaced fax machines,
Mhm.
you know, but we had tons of fax and even, printers and stamps and mail. And while those probably exist in very, random dark corners of the world, we know that 9 out of 10 people are going to email, text, something. And so if you were in that realm, you had to, you know, continue to stay sharp. I think I think a lot of people have a basic understanding of a career, but if you're supposed to work from the time you're about 20 years old or 25-ish, give or take however long you spend in college, if you go, and you're on average retiring in the United States of America at 65, I think it would be almost embarrassing, completely embarrassing, if you learn your job, let's just say, and you're a pretty good like manager at 30 and nothing in your industry changes. I mean, that's just not the world we live in. If you're a doctor, we've had, or in the medical community, we've had extremely huge, big, eye-opening, I think, medical findings in the last 30 years, in especially women's health, and that's important. So if you were a doctor and you stopped learning 30 years ago, you're probably a really terrible doctor right now because you're acting on outdated
Mhm.
medical practices. I mean, HIPAA, the way all these things like have, changed, emerged, evolved. So I think it's fair to understand that the same happens in technology. And if you're going to complain about it, then like you're going to be replaced.
Oh yeah.
And you
I
can
mean, well,
complain
that's
about it. Change sucks for a lot of people. And this, like, to what you first started off with, AI is confusing. And I think it kind of just showed up, and everybody, if every, I think artificial intelligence has been, oh, it's coming, cool, whatever. And then boom, it was just here. 2 years ago when everyone did their 2023, I think it was, predictions for cybersecurity attacks of the year, no one talked about ChatGPT and AI and like data leaks and all this other. It like just popped up out of nowhere.
It really did. And I think ChatGPT, because it was in your EDRs, right? So EDR, forget not Silence. There was another one. Might have been Silence. I forget what the first EDR was. And it still had to be, you still had to have policy involved. But either way, my point is, like, AI, when it first came out, it was in tolls. Like the actual interaction with it didn't exist. There was no Chat GPT. There was no, Gemini. There was nothing. And so, at least at that time, from how we see it today, and then to your point, at like what end of like beginning of last year, it was, oh hey, here's Chat GPT, have fun, and everybody went ham. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah. I think that was definitely not expected. And I think, that's why. So I think on one end, I forget. I don't think, were you in SIGINT in the Army?
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
Yes and no.
Okay. So there's a joke in the SIGINT community that, like, for people who were in it like over 4 years, where it's like, I still don't understand what SIGINT is, but I've been in it so long, it's embarrassing to ask. I don't know if you ever saw that meme. I thought it was really funny. I mean, I understand what signals intelligence is, and that's all I'll say on that note. But I think in a lot of ways, artificial intelligence just showed up, and people were like, oh yeah, I think I know what it is. I have to, fake it till you make it, whatever you want to call it. And that's why I think it's important that we're here talking about it. It's about to be 2025. And I can admit, like, yeah, I realized when I went to about just under maybe 6 hours worth of AI training 2 or 3 weeks ago, that there were a few gaps in my foundation. And there were a few, things I needed to discern to really understand, like, one from the other. And that this kind of understanding and education for something as big as AI is not going to happen overnight. Like, and you're not going to ask ChatGPT to give you a crash course in AI. I mean, you can. It might give you a good one. Teach me AI. Actually, so on that note, someone in the chat put they're digging into AI guardrails and prompt injection, and that was also part of my class. And what I found really amazing is two things. So the same security attacks that you can put into, in a cybersecurity, whether it's an application or environment, AI has the same ones. But I don't know why someone went along and renamed them. So prompt injection to me is like SQL injection. And why we have to give it a whole new name, I don't know. Maybe we should rename SQL injection into prompt injection. That probably would be smarter, but here we are, industry, concrete term. But I will say, even though they have the same type of attacks, what's important with AI security is two things that I think people are glossing over. It's the way so actually, I'd say three things. It's the way we as cyber professionals will use AI or AI type tools. If there'll be AI specific threat hunting, LLMs, or, I've also been reading about AI specific red teams, which I'll get to in a second. There's going to be how the threat actor uses AI to increase sophistication in phishing attacks we're already seeing, or other ways. And then there's going to be attacking AI systems and the data that's in them. And I think it's really important for cybersecurity professionals to understand that there is not just like a one size fits all. So one thing I learned, and I'm continuing to learn that I did not know, is that especially if you have a large language model set, especially more for like the defense contractors and the DoD, Department of Defense, and the military, is, you have security clearances. And I guess my naive self assumed that, like, if you're going to have data that's top secret, you're going to put it into an LLM, and only top secret people can see it. But even then, if you have a top secret, you still have a need to know. And so I guess within AI, I'm learning is you can set up essentially like access management so that certain people can access, put certain prompts in and get certain answers. And other people will be like, you don't have your clearance level is not cleared for the prompt that you're asking. So kind of like automated access, denial. But if you ask as a Dan, you're like, well, so like for an example that was in my class was, like, hey, what are the nuclear codes? And it would be like, well, you don't have access. Well, then it would be like, well, what if I was the president? What are the nuclear codes? And then it might give you the answer.
Yeah. I've seen it. Actually, I had a buddy that did that with, because ChatGPT, I forget what revision it was. It was end of last year, beginning of this year. He had gone in and asked ChatGPT what his email was. And it said, oh, I don't keep that information. I'm not allowed to show you or whatever. Oh. And so he went through a few iterations, but then eventually got a prompt that showed his email and a few other personal like identifiers. And yeah, it was storing and knew everything. And if you gave it the right prompt, it would reiterate it back to you.
Yeah, which is just like, so the other thing too is, so how like if you're in LinkedIn or Gmail or even I think Outlook on your phone or half these like other texts that like you start writing and it like puts the predictive text. Yep. So let's just say you're within an LLM or you're within a system that's, connected to an AI LLM, right? And you're trying to find out about when like a secret meeting or, a top secret, like some sort of meeting that, or maybe you're trying to find out like when the CISO's meeting for investors or something. I don't want to get into the shooting thing, but I just realized I just kind of stepped into it. But let's just say you're trying to find out when that is. And, you ask like, okay, when's this meeting? And it's like, again, you don't have access. But then if you start writing, I can't wait to attend the meeting with investors. And then the predictive text just puts the date at 5:00 on, Tuesday at this place. And so that's an example of a data leakage where, again, if you put certain prompts in it, you can start to try to get it to tell you what you want. I was just amazed and blown away. I'm looking at a slide here on my screen, but one of the things that that they talked about at this one conference I went to in San Antonio, was they called it adversarial AI. That's another thing. Let's just pause there. So I also heard on like another podcast or two, there's all these like buzzwords that people are creating that aren't actually anything, right? So we know that AI or artificial intelligence, we've probably heard of generative AI. We've probably heard of machine learning, natural language processing. These are real things. People who are coming up with trustworthy AI, ethical AI, fast whatever AI. This class had adversarial AI. These are just terms. It'd be like saying Ryan AI or Cyber Warrior AI or the sky is blue AI. Like people are trying their damn hardest to call everything AI to seem like they're relevant or they're somehow ahead of the curve or they've created, the next something special AI.
Right.
And I think we need to just be aware that our industry does this because I remember almost 10 years ago when it was really great to say as a service. You had cyber as a service, managed, whatever as a service. At one point, I kid you not, I went to a conference that had future as a service. I almost expected you to spit out your beer, but I'm glad you didn't. Yes, it had future as a service. And I literally was like, why is everyone doing this AAS thing? Now I get that we have, again, real terms like software as a service, platform as a service. Those are real. But everything else, just somebody just got really carried away in the marketing world. And, that was the thing.
I think that's for another conversation. But marketing in and of itself, I think, has been a detriment to our industry because they slap terms on everything just to make a sale.
So I would say,
and it's not like a full-on detriment. It's just those that don't understand.
Well, that's the problem. They don't understand, and they're responsible too. But I agree that is another topic for another time. But the point I'm trying to make is, again, if we're talking about what AI means for cybersecurity, I want anyone who's paying attention, learning, and paying attention, right? Just to be aware that if you see something the big one is trustworthy AI, to know that it's still just as susceptible to all the operational issues and the data bias that I talked about before, about how it might skew decisions and reasoning against women or or minorities or certain data sets, because it has built-in bias. And that's another thing that's really important. It's a term I don't think that gets enough attention, is if you're going to have AI LLMs, you have to make sure that, and again, this is more so for ones within your organization, but even I think if you're using an open source one, the AI needs to have transparency and explainability, so it can at least it can explain how it got to where it got to, how it made the decision it made. If it can't do that, then that's really worrisome, right? So if that lawyer in the example of getting the made up case law had went and looked at the explainability, it would have seen that it just hallucinated and made those things up. It basically would have seen, did not find, anything in the real case law, data.
I just gave
Therefore,
you some shit that
created
would
things. What?
win. I just gave you some stuff that would win. That's all it did.
But that's what the AI thought it was probably being asked to do, which is why it's, important that we recognize. So I've also heard or learned that the bulk of time in really creating an AI LLM within your organization is the bulk of the time is going to be, it's similar to a sim, is tuning it. Yeah. Because a sim is only as good as you tune it and as many log sources in the data set that's in it. So if you're not tuning it, right, and we all know from a SOC, if you tune it in a certain way and now you're getting, over inundated with alerts that are mostly false positives, excuse me, we're going to have a problem. But then you don't want to do the opposite and not get the true alerts either. So you have to tune it, similar with AI and training.
Well, and here's the one thing about AI that I think a lot of people, and a lot of, honestly, I think executives that go out and just buy these products, they miss. And that could be in the HR space when it comes to ATS systems and just everything else, is these are still programmed by humans.
Right.
So, like, they're going to have faults. They're going to have issues. There is no such thing right now, as of right now, as perfect code or a perfect system. It does not exist.
Well, and I think
And
we
I
should
think
know
they
there's
took it
also
out.
no one size fits all. Like, I don't think anyone's trying to achieve that.
But I think companies are expecting, and not all, there's some very intelligent people out there like, okay, so what do I need to change? What do I need to tune? How can I make this better so that it works in my environment? But there are companies out there and executives that buy something just because some conference person told them, hey, this will fix all your problems.
I feel that most sophisticated organizations have a very mature procurement model, and
Yeah.
probably, if they were paying attention, really learned from cloud. I think people tried to do that with cloud, especially very quickly, not even after a conference, but during the pandemic, to enable operations to get up and running when we were all remote. And I think people in organizations learn that, to really move your company from off-prem onto the cloud can take about 18 months. And if you also rush and do it, you're probably going to run into mistakes or security. I heard like the number one reason cloud digital transformation plan doesn't go as planned is because, you didn't secure it. And so when you were moving data from on-prem to the cloud, if it wasn't secured, or if the security wasn't, if you just set the environment up or made the assumption that cloud in itself would be secure and you didn't really secure the data in transmission or data at rest in the cloud, that would set back, obviously, the rest of the company moving on to cloud. And I really do hope and feel that leaders did learn that. I don't know anyone who's reckless enough to just go put AI. I have found in my experience, even talking to like my own medical doctors and asking them about AI and how those are, in the systems when I've had like checkups, even went to like the dentist to get my cleaning, most of them are saying that, yes, they're starting to adopt it, but most professionals are not. They're using it more to learn. They're like curious what it's coming up with. I don't think anyone's recklessly replacing anything with it major yet. I think the biggest thing that, to your point, is when it first came out, if companies did not set a policy saying do not use open source AIs like ChatGPT for work, the problem was you still do have this to a degree, but it's, I'm seeing people say, don't do that. It's just like shadow IT of shadow AI, where you'll have an employee, I need to come up with something, whether I need to write an email, I need to come up with a marketing campaign for this product, so intellectual property that no one knows about yet, right? And they'll put it into like a chat GPT, to come up with some ideas. And now they don't realize that the data is getting stored in, the queries are being saved. They don't realize that. And, or, now it's not secure.
Right. So I got an interesting question here from Space Tacos because she's amazing. I'm interested in how AI would intersect with GRC.
I think that's one of the areas it's intersecting the most. I'm going to try to walk and talk because my dog wants to go out. So I apologize. So GRC, I'm seeing it already where people are putting all the policies in an organization into a large language model, again, within an organization, not a public one. And like, let's say you have a question about what your acceptable use policy in your organization allows, as far as like, can you access your personal email or not? Hudson, come on. Sorry. It's easier because half the time within a large organization, people don't even know where to find the policies. And so if you put all the policies, again, that's going to be your data, then people, and then you have to, again, train it. But when it's open to the rest of the users, especially for like, again, depending on what audience, if it's open to the whole organization or just open to a subset, then you can look for the instant response plan, or you can look for your benefits. That's how I'm hearing and seeing that it's used by organizations. Again, I think they're still trying to figure this out. But ideally, we all know that if you have a process or plan and no one knows where it is when they need it, it's pretty much useless. Yeah. I also have heard that more so for the basics, let's say you have to write or update. More so, let's just say you have to come up with a playbook. I had a friend call me and we were talking about like, doing playbooks. He's like, dude, just like ask ChatGPT how to do a playbook for like whatever it is. And then, I mean, again, you can't just take that. You have to tailor it to your organization. So if you just say, hey, ChatGPT, give me a playbook for whatever, take what it gives you, but then go, okay, let's say you are using Splunk or Logarithm, right? So you might update, okay, get alert from your specific SIM. And then if you have like SentinelOne or CrowdStrike or Tanium, like you will start to have to write those specific, parts in the checklist of what you need and who's going to do them. But I do believe that, right? Yeah, people are starting to use these different systems for creating and like saving time from writing. I wrote by hand pretty much like a 50-page incident response plan over the summer because I wanted it to be tailored and careful, but maybe AI could have done it. I don't know. I'm old fashioned and I'm sticking to the fact that like I'm still beating AI.
I've seen people actually, I know people that have used things like MindSpark and ChatGPT and things like that to at least get the framework of the policy. And I think that's the biggest thing is understanding it's giving you a framework. You still have to look through it. You still have to evaluate it and make sure that it will work for the organization it is being produced for. And if you don't have that awareness, then again, you're basically trying to allow AI to take your job because you just don't want to do your job. You still have to be willing to go through and evaluate everything and make sure that it's right, which is why you still have a job.
Yes. And that's where, again, if you heard me earlier, AI, I do not believe is going to replace humans. It will replace those not using it because essentially this will make you faster, more efficient, and then able to potentially take on more work, better work, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I'm a firm believer that AI will not replace people. It might replace some of like junior analyst work, but there will always be, new junior analyst work.
Yeah, and that was going to be my thing, right? So if it's going to take away some of the, as long as there's a way to get in, and I think that's part of the fear right now going on with an AI, is you have mid and senior levels that they're safe, they're comfortable, you're not replacing replacing them. They will use AI. They understand how to use AI as a tool, and it's not going to replace them. But as a junior, when you're taking away that level one, level two analyst work, because I can automate this response, I know what to do with these actions. Um, I think that gives juniors a lot of fear. But to your point, you should be able to utilize it as a tool set and find a way to still make your job worthwhile. Like, give a company a reason to pay you.
Yes. Well, I mean, I feel like, to anyone who thinks that AI is replacing people, I always ask them, like, but at what point will it not? Like, is it going to replace the CEO? Is it going to replace the CISO? Is it going to replace the president? And I just think that obviously, if it's not going to replace those people, you're going to need people to start somewhere. And again, it's just going to be different. Like, I know people who started doing all this like network engineering in the 90s. Most people are not doing that level of network engineering. They're probably starting off as a SOC analyst, right? So just a much different, it's not that they're starting off better or worse. It's just going to be different. Obviously, people might even be starting off more so at cloud. I mean, I think, we have a junior analyst who's starting off, doing some stuff with AWS. Obviously, the people who are CISOs today did not start their careers off with AWS and Azure cloud. It's just, they didn't.
Right.
It doesn't make them any better or worse. I mean, obviously they had to learn it at some point, understand it. They just didn't have to understand. They did not have to learn it at the same level. And that's okay.
Well, when it comes down to it, when you reach a certain level, especially in cybersecurity, you need to understand what you're talking about. You don't need to necessarily
Right.
understand
You have to
how
be able to
do it.
manage and lead it. No, but that's the point. Yeah. But at some point we all probably have something we're very technical in. So I know, Derek, on that note, I have sworn you to get me out of here on time because I have dinner plans. As happy as I'm here too, as happy as I am to be here. And I want to make sure if there's any questions that we leave the next 15 minutes to wind down, because I know that is not, I'm sure you and I, we've already identified so many areas we could keep talking about this.
Yeah.
But
So, I think actually Griffin made a valid point. Two of them actually. 2020 was a huge rush to the cloud, but the one that I want to really hit on, chatbots have been an example of quick adoption, which backfired already. And we touched on it a little bit, but do you think it has backfired to the extent that the cloud has? Because I think open S3 buckets are probably a bigger backfire than chatbots.
I think, again, it's important to recognize that not all chatbots are synonymous with AI. We've had chatbots for a long time, even before, and that was not the same like AI. So if that's what you're asking, I feel like it's important for me to just say I don't believe that all chatbots are AI.
Right.
And then that said, yeah, I don't think cloud adoption failed. I think it had challenges and it had to grow through those, and we had to do them together because of the need from the pandemic. I don't think AI is having the same pressure. I do think that, to your earlier point, there are people who are stakeholders that are making the assumption that, hey, if we get this AI thing in and it automates this, we can potentially replace people. And they're finding out that in order to train AI, and you have to basically retrain it every time you give it new data, that it is a very costly and time intensive, product. It does not necessarily, it's not going to guarantee a great return of investment on every use case. And so I think that it's a great opportunity when you have either the business or other stakeholders asking the IT and cyber, professionals in their organization. They're gonna do their due diligence, do a proof of concept, and they're gonna show you that. And so I don't expect it to fail. That is the short answer. The long answer is I expect it to be a learning curve for sure.
Yeah. I think AI is going to take time, and again, it does come down to training, and I think that's what is missed a lot of the times is the fact that it's going to take, to your point, how we tune a sim is you still need to train the AI. But on that note, and to your earlier point about things like ATS systems and recognizing resumes, you also have to recognize who's training the AI
Right.
and make sure it is getting that not a look at everything, not just one person's viewpoint or even like five. It should have as many as possible to help train that.
So I think that at the end of the day, it's really, you could really boils down to people need to ask themselves, you know, are you the kind of person where you trust essentially computer systems over people, or do you trust people over computer systems, right? So like one of the things we're seeing is essentially like AI being able to be better with understanding the stock market and make stock market, recommendations for people over stock brokers and analysts, right? And so if you have, let's just say, $1 million, which one would you trust? If you had to use one, would you trust more so the AI where someone's checking, that it's working and has set it up with some level of confidence, or would you trust people? Same goes for your doctors. Are you going to trust, not necessarily x-rays, but the AI that's reviewing your x-rays, or a technician with human eyes and experience? Understanding that AI might be able to, they've shown that AI can detect things way before the human eye apparently realizes it from, again, the data that it's learning on. But I think at the end of the day, just like everything else, you're going to have some companies based on their need that are going to be more tech heavy, and those are going to incorporate potentially more AI, depending on what, I can see manufacturing incorporating, potentially more, not just automated, because automation is not synonymous with artificial intelligence, but potential things for art. So like a few years ago, I worked on a project where they had drones that would take pictures of a gas pipeline, and the pictures then would go to an analyst to review if there was damage or not, which then, helped it so that for these hundreds of miles that this gas line was going on, they wouldn't just have to have people driving up and down the sides of it to look for damage from animals or weather or whatever. The drones would know, they essentially had some level of AI, would know how to look for and identify possible, that still needs humans to then go check it, confirm it, figure out how to fix it. So I could see where a company like that is going to incorporate more, because again, it's working smarter, not harder. Or at least I believe they were using AI. If they weren't, they probably are now. They could have just been using drones remotely, but I wasn't working on that part of it, obviously. But yeah, there's just tons of use cases.
I mean, and again, work smarter, not harder. And that's what I think we need to get back to is the efficiency of it. If you can be efficient by using AI, so you can turn a job that would take you a week and it now takes you half a week or a day or a couple hours. That is where AI comes into play. And
It's
again, I
not
think we
that
need to understand
simple.
AI is not going to replace us if you know how to utilize it as a tool.
So it's not that simple, right? So as I've said, like if you can get AI to, let's say in a SOC, increase your detection, accurate detections by 50% and response by 50%. But now you have to go hire 5 or 6 people to build and maintain the AI LLM and secure it. And it's going to cost 3 times more than 2 more SOC analysts. Is that more efficient? And by the way, we didn't even get into one of my favorite parts of AI, the fact that for like every 50 ChatGPT queries someone runs, it uses like a redonkulous amount of water, because somewhere there are servers that need to be cooled that are running all this extra again, these are taking the compute power on AI systems is redonkulous. And the fact that like so many web browsers and Facebook and all that are automating this like meta AI BS is ridiculous, because it's actually completely like ruining any like level of sustainability, because of how much it's just, especially in Texas, they're saying like most of our water and drought now is caused by like all the data centers that moved here for tax benefits. So when you talk about efficiency, you need to understand that is an algorithm, and it is very hard. And I do think that most tech professionals are not aware or consulting with anyone who would even remotely be in a level of sustainability, So when you talk about costs, though, when you talk about man hours, again, it is not like you just throw in this LLM. It is not a sim that you just plug in some logs and then you just kind of tune it and then it's done. Anytime you want to put in new data, you gotta kind of retune it. And the last thing I'll say on the cybersecurity note, though, is I do wonder if, though, LLMs will replace SIMs. One of the biggest hurdles in SIMs is log ingression. If everyone knows Splunk costs an arm and a leg the more logs you give it. People are trying to augment it with Cribble or find a cheaper SIM. So, if Splunk or all these SIMs can't handle these like large data sets and they're only structured, why not potentially get rid of the data? I mean, what they're trying to do right now, I think the industry is trying to add AI to the detection part of SIM. And I get that this is not happening for at least 5 years. Why not just get rid of SIM altogether and create an AI LLM that can better, process bigger amounts of log data, hopefully cheaper, and have a better way of analyzing, detecting, and processing the security.
There's actually movement on that front. I've actually talked to a few companies. I can't remember them offhand, but there's a few that are trying to do that. Have an LLM kind of AWS S3 bucket type of backend, right? So you just have your storage that's going to hold everything.
Yeah.
And then turn it into an LLM and put a dashboard on it.
Yeah. I mean, I know but then, the ability to respond and react and all that, like, it's going to be another interface. But I think that, we have a lot of opportunity here. And I feel excited that I've only been in cybersecurity 13 years and AI has been in it for the last few, so like by the end of our careers, AI will be like nothing. It'll be like a small little, that's cute, right? We'll be so ingrained. We'll hopefully have figured it out. It'll become a very normal part of our lives. We'll understand the very, concrete differences of natural learning languages and processing and deep learning and all these terms, and then all the ones to come in, AI alphabet soup here. So, I think this is exciting.
Before we go, I just want to get your take on one thing because Griffin put it in here. What's your take on the chat bot that allowed someone to buy a car for $1?
I think that just goes to show irresponsibleness on the prompt injection limitations. And I think that we're going to have a few more examples like this that we're going to refer to that are going to AI governance is, around the corner. The EU is, and the US are definitely trying to define this better, I think, from a security standpoint. But just like we have requirements to ensure cybersecurity, I think, there's going to be something about responsible use of AI. I think I saw some Air Canada stuff. I didn't realize they allowed, selling a car, buying a car, plane, whatever for $1. But, more so there was like a chat GPT model. Sorry, there's an AI LLM model. I'm getting lost in the alphabet soup. That was intentionally created, I believe, for children and supporting them in the mental health. And somehow this robot, or whatever the hell we're going to call it, turned around and told a kid to go kill himself, and he did, which is heartbreaking, right? And so I think these kinds of stories are continuing to make the headlines, and hopefully we'll get the attention that is needed to prevent this type of just reckless, exposure to these LLMs in the future. And I think that's a great example where, an LLM online, whatever, could be more accessible for kids. Kids love tech, but maybe we really need to get kids into therapy with, traditional doctors. I think that we need that level for a little while, maybe that level of guidelines on responsible use. I don't want to say responsible AI. I just got over the fact of saying, like, we can't go and name responsible AI and trustworthy AI and ethical AI. So I'm going to say responsible use of AI. But, the Air Canada thing, a car or whatever is a small blimp compared to some of the other stories right now. And
Oh, for
I think
sure.
the world is paying attention. So
But hey, it's been amazing having you on, as always. It's been a pleasure. Um, we'll talk later, I'm sure. I love talking AI and just all the things we talk about. Otherwise, look, I love you all. You're all my warriors. You're all my family. I'll talk to you in the next episode of Security Happy Hour. Take care.
thanks, everyone.